I'm sitting here in room 237 of the Sunset Motel on Route 9, and I can barely believe I'm saying these words. 3 hours ago, my daughter-in-law Brittany looked me straight in the eye and said, "You're too old to live with us anymore, Elena. It's time." My own son Marcus just stood there in our driveway, silent as a stone, while she handed me this single black suitcase and told me to get in the car. I raised that boy for 38 years. I thought I knew him. The drive here was the longest 20 minutes of my life. Brittany kept adjusting her rearview mirror, avoiding my eyes, while Marcus stared out the passenger window like he was watching a movie instead of living his real life. Nobody spoke. The only sound was the GPS lady giving directions to a place I never imagined I'd end up. When we pulled into this parking lot, I actually thought it was a mistake. "There must be some confusion," I said. But Brittany was already getting out, popping the trunk like this was the most normal thing in the world. Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. I keep staring at this suitcase on the floral bedspread, wondering what my life has become. This morning I woke up in the house where I'd lived for 2 years since my husband David died. I made coffee in the kitchen where I'd cooked thousands of meals for my family. I helped my granddaughter Sophie with her math homework at the dining room table, where we've shared countless Sunday dinners. I folded laundry in the room that used to be Marcus's childhood bedroom, the room that became mine when I moved in to help with the kids and the mortgage payments. Now I'm surrounded by walls the color of old mustard, listening to trucks rumble past on the highway, and someone's television bleeding through the paper-thin walls. The carpet has stains I don't want to think about, and there's a crack running down the bathroom mirror that splits my reflection right down the middle. The air conditioner rattles like it's dying, and everything smells like a combination of industrial cleaning products and other people's disappointment. Brittany handed me $200 in cash before they left. $200. Like I was some kind of charity case instead of the woman who helped raise her children and contributed my teacher's pension to their household expenses for the past 2 years. "This should cover you for a few days while we sort things out," she said, already backing toward the car. A few days, like I was a problem with an expiration date. Marcus couldn't even look at me when I asked, "What did I do wrong, son?" He just mumbled something about finding the right place and promised they'd call tomorrow. Tomorrow. As if abandoning your 62-year-old mother at a roadside motel was just a minor scheduling issue that could be resolved with a phone call. I've been a teacher for 35 years. I've seen troubled families, broken homes, and children who felt unwanted. I never imagined I'd be sitting in a place like this, feeling exactly the same way those kids did. Invisible, disposable, like my entire life could fit in one black suitcase. But here's what Brittany and Marcus don't know yet. This isn't the end of my story. This is where it really begins. Let me tell you about the life I had just this morning, because it feels like a lifetime ago now. For 2 years after my husband David died, I lived with Marcus, Brittany, and my grandchildren Sophie and Jake in their beautiful colonial house on Maple Street. Those were supposed to be the golden years I dreamed about during all those decades of teaching other people's children. Finally, I got to be the grandmother I'd always wanted to be. Every morning started the same way. I'd wake up at 6:30 a.m. in what used to be Marcus's childhood bedroom. The walls still painted the soft blue I'd chosen when he was 7. I could hear the house coming alive around me. Brittany's shower running upstairs, Jake's alarm clock buzzing down the hall, and the familiar creak of Marcus's footsteps on the hardwood stairs. By the time I made it to the kitchen, the coffee was brewing, and I'd have breakfast ready before anyone even asked. Sophie would stumble downstairs in her fuzzy slippers, her dark hair sticking up in impossible directions, and climb onto the stool next to where I stood at the counter. "Morning, Grandma," she'd mumble, still half asleep, and I'd slide a plate of her favorite blueberry pancakes in front of her. Jake would bound in minutes later, already dressed and chattering about his soccer practice or the book report he forgot to finish. I'd pack their lunches while Brittany rushed around gathering papers for her real estate showings, and Marcus grabbed his coffee and kissed everyone goodbye. "Elena, you're such a blessing to our family," Brittany would say, giving me a warm hug before heading out. "I don't know what we'd do without you." Those words made my heart sing every single time. After losing David and facing the prospect of growing old alone, I felt needed again. Wanted, like I belonged somewhere. The afternoons were my favorite. I'd pick up the kids from school in Marcus's old Honda, and we'd stop at the library or the park before heading home. Sophie would curl up next to me on the living room couch while I helped her with algebra, her head resting on my shoulder like she used to do when she was little. Jake would spread his art supplies across the dining room table, and I'd sit with him, watching him create these amazing drawings while he told me about his day in that rapid-fire way 9-year-olds have. Sunday dinners were sacred in our house. I'd spend hours in the kitchen preparing David's famous pot roast recipe, the one that filled the whole house with the smell of garlic and rosemary. Marcus would set the table with the good china, the same set his father and I had received as wedding gifts 40 years ago. We'd all gather around that big oak table, sharing stories and laughter, and I'd look around at these beautiful faces and think, this is what happiness looks like. I wasn't just living there, I was contributing. My teacher's pension covered nearly half their mortgage payment, and I'd insisted on paying for Sophie's piano lessons and Jake's soccer league fees. When their washing machine broke, I bought them a new one. When Brittany's car needed repairs, I handed over my credit card without hesitation. This was my family, my investment in our shared future. I felt so secure, so certain that I'd found my place in their world. Brittany would joke that I was like a live-in fairy godmother, and Marcus would tell his friends how lucky they were to have me there to help with everything. I thought I'd never feel lonely again. I thought I'd finally found home. How wrong I was. The change started so subtly that I almost missed it entirely. It was a Tuesday morning in early October, about 6 months ago, when I first noticed something different in Brittany's voice. I was standing at the kitchen counter, whisking eggs for Jake's favorite scrambled eggs with cheese, when she walked in wearing her navy blue real estate blazer, already checking emails on her phone. "Good morning, sweetheart," I said cheerfully, the way I had every morning for nearly 2 years. "I'm making Jake's eggs just the way he likes them. Should I scramble some for you too?" Brittany looked up from her phone, and there was this tiny pause, like she was choosing her words carefully. "I've got it, Elena," she said, but her tone was different, cooler, more clipped than usual. She moved toward the coffee maker, and I noticed she didn't smile at me the way she normally did. "Are you sure? You know how you're always rushing in the mornings," I offered, still whisking. "I don't mind at all." "I said I've got it." This time there was a definite edge, followed by what I could only describe as a sigh. Not a tired sigh, but the kind of sigh you make when someone isn't getting the hint. She poured her coffee without looking at me, and for the first time in months, the kitchen felt awkward. I told myself she was probably stressed about a difficult client or worried about a house closing. Real estate could be demanding, and I knew she'd been working on a particularly challenging sale. I finished Jake's eggs in silence, but the easy morning rhythm we'd developed felt suddenly fragile. The real warning sign came 2 weeks later. I came home from my weekly grocery shopping trip to find the living room completely rearranged. The couch had been moved to the opposite wall, the coffee table relocated, and my favorite reading chair, David's old leather recliner that Marcus had brought from our original house, was now crammed into the corner by the window, facing away from the television. "Oh," I said, setting my grocery bags down. "You redecorated." Brittany emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "I hired an interior designer to come take a look. She said the flow was all wrong. The furniture was blocking the natural light." She gestured broadly at the room like she was showing a potential buyer. "Doesn't it feel more spacious now?" I walked over to David's chair, now positioned awkwardly in the corner where it clearly didn't belong. "I suppose it does," I said carefully, "but I can't really see the TV from here anymore, and I miss being able to watch the kids play from my usual spot." "This is our house, Elena, not a museum." The words came out sharp and fast, like she'd been waiting to say them. "We can't arrange everything around one piece of old furniture." Old furniture. David's chair, where he'd held both Marcus and me through countless evenings, where I'd rocked baby Sophie to sleep, where I'd graded thousands of papers over the years, reduced to old furniture. "Of course," I said quietly. "I just meant—" "I know what you meant." Brittany's voice softened slightly, but her smile looked forced. "You'll adjust. Change is good for everyone." Marcus was on a business trip that week, so I convinced myself she was just overwhelmed managing everything alone. Surely when he came back, things would return to normal. I moved my reading sessions to my bedroom and didn't mention the chair again. But late at night, lying in Marcus's old childhood bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted. I just didn't realize it was only the beginning. The exclusions started small, like paper cuts you don't notice until they start to sting. It was the little Friday night tradition that disappeared first. For over a year, our family game nights had been sacred. Every Friday at 7 p.m., we'd gather around the dining room table with Monopoly, Scrabble, or cards and spend hours laughing until our sides hurt. Sophie would always insist on being the banker in Monopoly, and Jake would try to sneak extra money when no one was looking. Marcus and I would team up against Brittany in Scrabble, and she'd playfully accuse us of cheating when we'd use obscure teaching vocabulary words. But suddenly, on a Friday evening in November, I came downstairs at our usual time to find the dining room empty. I could hear voices and laughter coming from the family room, so I followed the sound, expecting to find them setting up a new game. "Oh, there you are, Elena," Brittany said, barely looking up from shuffling a deck of cards. "We decided to play poker tonight. Adult time, you know. You should rest. We don't want to tire you out." Rest? I was 62, not 92. I'd been teaching energetic teenagers for decades, staying up late grading papers and managing classroom activities that would exhaust people half my age. "I'd love to play," I said. "David taught me poker years ago. I'm actually pretty good at it." "Maybe next time," Marcus said, not meeting my eyes. "It's been a long week for everyone." I stood there for a moment, watching my family arrange themselves around a game that apparently didn't have room for me anymore. "Okay," I said finally. "I guess I'll just read upstairs." "That's perfect, Mom," Marcus replied, already dealing the cards. "You love reading." As I climbed the stairs, I could hear them laughing again, the same easy laughter we used to share together. But now I was listening to it from the outside, like a neighbor hearing a party they weren't invited to. The pattern continued in ways that felt both subtle and devastating. When they decided to stream a new series everyone was talking about, it became too complicated for me to follow. When they made plans for Saturday afternoon activities, I was told I probably wouldn't enjoy mini golf or the new escape room downtown. When Sophie asked why Grandma couldn't come bowling with them anymore, I overheard Brittany explaining, "Grandma needs quiet time. All this activity isn't good for people her age." People her age. Like I was part of some fragile, separate category of human being. The worst part was how my grandchildren began to adapt to my absence. Sophie stopped asking me to help with her math homework, saying Brittany told her I might find the new methods confusing. Jake started taking his art projects to his room instead of spreading them across the dining room table where we used to work together. When I offered to help with school projects or asked about their days, I'd get polite, brief answers before they hurried off to find their parents. I began eating dinner earlier and earlier, finishing before the family gathered, telling myself it was just easier that way. But the truth was, sitting at that table watching them interact while feeling invisible was more painful than eating alone. I'd clean up my dishes and retreat to my room, listening to the sounds of the family I used to be part of, continuing their evening without me. Some nights, I'd lie awake wondering if I was imagining it all, if my grief over David was making me paranoid and needy. But deep down, I knew exactly what was happening. I was being erased, one small exclusion at a time. Sophie's 12th birthday was supposed to be a celebration, and I had been looking forward to it for weeks. I'd secretly ordered her favorite chocolate cake from the bakery downtown, the one with the buttercream roses she'd admired in their window display. I'd also spent an entire afternoon at the craft store, carefully selecting supplies to make a Happy Birthday Sophie banner by hand, painting each letter in her favorite purple and gold colors. The morning of the party, I was up early, hanging streamers in the backyard and arranging the folding chairs Marcus had borrowed from his office. I felt useful again, needed, like the grandmother I'd always imagined I'd be. Sophie had hugged me the night before and said, "Grandma, I can't wait for tomorrow. You make everything more special." Around noon, I was in the kitchen, carefully arranging the purple and gold banner across the sliding glass door, when the doorbell rang. "I'll get it," I called out, smoothing my dress, the nice floral one I'd bought specifically for family occasions. I was carrying the banner, planning to ask whoever arrived to help me hang it at just the right height. It was Lisa, Brittany's closest friend and fellow real estate agent. Lisa had always been pleasant to me, complimenting my cooking and asking about my teaching days. "Oh, Elena," she said brightly. "You look lovely. Is Brittany around?" "She's upstairs getting ready," I replied. "Would you mind helping me hang this banner? I want it to be perfect for Sophie." "Of course," Lisa said, but I noticed she was already looking past me into the house. "Let me just find Brittany first." I followed her toward the staircase, still holding the banner, when I heard Brittany's voice drifting down from the upstairs hallway. She was talking to Marcus, and they hadn't noticed Lisa and me at the bottom of the stairs. "I'm telling you, Marcus, we need to make a decision soon," Brittany was saying. "Lisa's been asking about senior living communities because her mother might need one. It got me thinking about Elena." My heart stopped. I stood frozen, clutching Sophie's banner, as Lisa looked uncomfortable beside me. "We're looking into assisted living for Elena," Brittany continued, and I could hear her moving around upstairs, probably getting dressed. "It's getting harder having her here all the time. She hovers constantly, rearranges things to suit herself, and the kids are starting to think all these changes are normal. She needs to be around people her own age." Lisa shifted awkwardly next to me, clearly realizing I could hear everything, but I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. "I don't know, Britt." Marcus's voice was quieter, harder to hear. "Marcus, be honest. When was the last time we had privacy in our own home? When could we make decisions without having to consider Elena's feelings about everything? She's become, well, let's face it, she's becoming a burden." The word hit me like a physical blow. Burden. Lisa touched my arm gently, but I barely felt it. Brittany's voice continued, clearer now as she moved closer to the stairs. "At her age, she probably doesn't even realize she's becoming a burden. That's what happens. Lisa, you'll understand when your mother gets older. They think they're helping, but really they're just in the way." I stood there in my nice floral dress, holding my granddaughter's carefully crafted birthday banner, feeling completely invisible and utterly disposable. Lisa's face was full of pity, which somehow made it worse. I was the subject of their casual conversation, discussed like a problem to be solved rather than a person who could hear every word. "Elena," Lisa whispered, "maybe we should go outside." But I couldn't move. I was invisible and exposed all at once. 2 weeks after Sophie's birthday party, the conversation I'd been dreading finally happened. Marcus came home from work on a Thursday evening, carrying a manila folder thick with glossy brochures, the kind with smiling elderly people on the covers, doing puzzles and gardening. He found me in the kitchen washing the dinner dishes. Dishes for a meal I'd eaten alone again, while the family had quick sandwiches upstairs. "Mom," he said, setting the folder on the counter next to me, "Brittany and I have been doing some research. We found some really nice places." I dried my hands slowly on the dish towel, staring at the folder like it might bite me. "What kind of places, Marcus?" "Senior living communities," he said, his voice carefully neutral, like he was reading from a script. "They have activities, people your own age, meal programs. You wouldn't have to worry about cooking or cleaning anymore." Brittany appeared in the doorway as if on cue, wearing her brightest real estate smile. "Elena, wait until you see these places. They're like resorts. Bingo nights, book clubs, even swimming pools. Won't that be wonderful? You'll have friends your own age instead of being stuck here with us boring family members all the time." I opened the folder with trembling fingers. Sunset Manor, Golden Years Community, Peaceful Pines Assisted Living. Each brochure showed the same staged photographs. Silver-haired people laughing over card games, tending small gardens, sitting in pleasant common rooms that looked nothing like real homes. "Have I done something wrong?" I asked quietly, not looking up from the brochures. "If I've been too much help in the kitchen, or if I've overstepped somehow, please just tell me. I can change." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, it's not about what you've done wrong. It's time. You deserve to be around people who understand what you're going through." "What am I going through?" I asked, genuinely confused. "I thought I was living with my family." "You are," Brittany said quickly. "But wouldn't you be happier with people who share your interests? People who remember the same music, the same movies? You're always talking about your teaching days. Imagine having friends who understand that world." I closed the folder carefully. These weren't suggestions. They were evictions served with smiles and logic that was supposed to make me grateful. "When would you like me to look at these places?" "This Saturday," Marcus said, relief flooding his voice. "We thought we could visit 2 or 3, maybe have lunch out, make a day of it." "Okay," I said simply. What else could I say? That I loved living with my grandchildren? That helping with homework and making Sunday dinners gave my life meaning? That the thought of sitting in a common room with strangers talking about the past, instead of being part of my family's future, terrified me? Saturday morning arrived gray and drizzling. I dressed carefully in my good navy dress and the pearl earrings David had given me for our anniversary. If I was going to visit my future prison, I wanted to look dignified. But instead of turning toward the Sunset Manor we'd seen first in the brochures, Marcus drove toward the highway. "Where are we going?" I asked from the back seat. "Just a quick stop first," Brittany said, without turning around. When we pulled into the Sunset Motel parking lot, I thought Marcus had made a wrong turn. "This isn't the assisted living place," I said. "Mom," Marcus said, finally turning to face me, his eyes red-rimmed, "this is temporary, just until we find the right place." The right place. Like I was luggage to be stored. I wasn't angry. I was beyond anger, in that quiet space where your heart simply stops believing in the people you thought you knew. The door to room 237 closed with a hollow thud that seemed to echo through my entire body. I stood there for a full minute, keycard trembling in my hand, listening to Marcus's Honda pull away from the parking lot. The engine sound grew fainter and fainter until it was swallowed by the constant hum of highway traffic, leaving me alone with the devastating silence of abandonment. The room was everything you'd expect from a $49 a night motel on Route 9. The carpet was a brownish color that had probably once been beige, stained with decades of coffee spills and worse things I didn't want to imagine. The bedspread was a garish floral pattern in colors that existed nowhere in nature, rough to the touch and smelling like industrial laundry detergent mixed with other people's disappointment. I sat down on the edge of the bed and immediately felt the mattress sag in the middle, springs creaking a protest that sounded almost human. The air conditioner rattled like a dying animal, alternating between Arctic blasts and complete silence in a rhythm that made me feel even more unsettled. Through the paper-thin walls, I could hear a television blaring a game show on one side and what sounded like a heated phone argument on the other. "You promised me the money by Tuesday," someone was shouting, and I wondered if my neighbors were facing their own versions of family betrayal. I pulled out the $200 cash Brittany had pressed into my hand like I was some kind of charity case. 2 crisp $100 bills that were supposed to cover a few days while they sorted things out. I spread the bills on the stained bedside table and tried to calculate. This room cost $49 a night plus taxes. Food, even if I ate nothing but dollar menu items, would be at least $15 a day. The money might last 4 days if I was extremely careful, maybe 5 if I didn't eat much. What would happen on day 6? I opened my black suitcase, the one that apparently contained my entire life now. Brittany had packed it so hastily that nothing was folded properly. My favorite cardigan was wrinkled beyond recognition. She'd thrown in a random assortment of clothes, 3 pairs of underwear, 2 bras, a nightgown, the floral dress I was wearing to Sophie's party 2 weeks ago. No family photos, no mementos, nothing that would remind me of the life I'd just lost. But she had included my medications, which felt like the cruelest practical kindness. Keep me alive, but not living. The bathroom mirror had a crack running down the middle that split my reflection into two broken halves. The fluorescent light flickered intermittently, making my skin look gray and sickly. I looked like a ghost of myself, a woman who had somehow become so insignificant that her own family could discard her without a second thought. I sat back down on the bed and tried to call my sister Rosa in Arizona, but it went straight to voicemail. "Hi, this is Rosa. I'm probably out hiking or at book club. Leave me a message." Her cheerful voice made me realize I couldn't even explain what had happened. How do you tell someone that your son dropped you at a motel like unwanted luggage? Outside my window, the neon sign buzzed and flickered. Sunset Motel. Weekly rates available. Weekly rates. Was this what my life had become? A woman calculating weekly motel rates at age 62? I lay back on the scratchy bedspread, still fully dressed, and stared at the water-stained ceiling. This morning, I had woken up as Elena Martinez, beloved grandmother, helpful family member, retired teacher with dignity and purpose. Tonight, I was nobody at all. By the second night in that godforsaken motel room, I forced myself to properly unpack my single suitcase. I couldn't keep living out of it like I was just passing through, because the truth was becoming painfully clear. I had nowhere else to go. I spread my meager belongings across the scratched dresser, trying to create some semblance of order in a life that had become completely chaotic. My hands were shaking as I lifted out my nightgown, and that's when I felt it. Something crinkled inside the fabric. Brittany had wrapped something in my clothes, probably to save space. I unfolded the nightgown carefully and found a manila envelope tucked inside, one I definitely didn't remember packing. The envelope was addressed to Mrs. Elena Martinez, informal business letterhead from Peterson, Hayes & Associates, David's law firm. The postmark was dated 6 months ago, which confused me immediately. I'd been living with Marcus and Brittany then, and I definitely would have remembered receiving legal correspondence. How had this ended up in my suitcase? With trembling fingers, I tore open the envelope and pulled out several official-looking documents. The cover letter was on expensive cream-colored paper, the kind lawyers use to make everything seem more important. "Dear Mrs. Martinez," it began, "we are writing to inform you of a trust fund established by your late husband, David Martinez, prior to his passing. As per his instructions, this information was to be disclosed to you 6 months following his death, allowing you time to grieve and adjust to your new circumstances." Trust fund? David had never mentioned a trust fund. I kept reading, my heart beating so hard I could hear it over the rattling air conditioner. "The David Martinez Family Protection Trust contains $180,000, with you named as the sole beneficiary. Your husband was very specific about the circumstances under which you should be informed of this inheritance. He wanted to ensure you would never be financially vulnerable or dependent on others out of necessity rather than choice." $180,000. I read the number 3 times, certain I was misunderstanding something. David had been a careful man, a good provider, but we'd lived modestly on our teachers' salaries. Where had this money come from? The second page explained everything. David had been quietly investing small amounts from each paycheck for over 20 years, using an account I didn't know existed. He'd also taken out a life insurance policy beyond the one I knew about, with the proceeds going directly into this trust. The letter included a phrase that made my breath catch. David's explicit instructions were that if you ever found yourself in a situation of elder abandonment or family neglect, additional legal protections would be available to you. Elder abandonment. David had actually anticipated this situation. The third page outlined something that made my hands shake even more violently. The house on Maple Street, our original family home that I'd signed over to Marcus when I moved in with them, could be legally reclaimed under specific circumstances. If the beneficiary is removed from a family home without proper legal procedures, or if elder abuse is documented, the property transfer can be contested under state elder protection laws. I sat on that awful motel bed, holding these papers, and suddenly understood something profound. David hadn't just left me money, he'd left me power. He'd known me well enough to predict that I might someday be in exactly this situation, dependent on family members who might not have my best interests at heart. The letter concluded with contact information for Mr. Peterson and a simple instruction. Elena, you are stronger than you know, and you are never alone. David's final words to you. For the first time in 3 days, I wasn't crying. I was planning. I read David's letter 7 times that night, each word sinking deeper into a part of me that had been dormant for months. By the third reading, I wasn't just understanding the legal implications. I was remembering who Elena Martinez actually was before I became someone's burden, someone's problem to solve. I had been a teacher for 35 years. I had managed classrooms full of challenging teenagers, navigated difficult parents, balanced budgets for school departments, and earned the respect of colleagues who came to me for advice. I had raised Marcus as a single mother for the first 8 years of his life, while David was deployed overseas, working full-time and managing everything alone. I had survived my husband's death and built a new life, contributing financially and emotionally to Marcus's household. When had I started believing I was helpless? I walked to the cracked bathroom mirror and looked at my reflection. Really looked at it for the first time since arriving at this motel. Yes, I had gray hair, but it was still thick and healthy. Yes, I had lines around my eyes, but they were laugh lines from decades of joy, not marks of defeat. I was 62 years old, not 92. I had raised a son, built a career, and managed a household for 4 decades. My mind was sharp, my body was strong, and my bank account, as of today, was more substantial than I'd ever imagined. The fog of self-doubt that had been clouding my judgment for months began to lift like morning mist. I started seeing the past year with startling clarity. Every time Brittany had told me I needed rest instead of letting me help, she was training me to see myself as frail. Every time Marcus had suggested something was too complicated for me to understand, he was teaching me to doubt my own intelligence. Every time they'd excluded me from family decisions to avoid stressing me, they were conditioning me to accept my own irrelevance. But I wasn't irrelevant. I was inconvenient. There's a profound difference. I was inconvenient because I had opinions about how my grandchildren should be raised. I was inconvenient because I noticed when bills weren't being paid on time, when the kids needed more attention, when family dynamics were becoming unhealthy. I was inconvenient because my presence reminded Marcus that he had responsibilities beyond his own immediate desires. I was inconvenient because I represented values and traditions that didn't align with Brittany's vision of their perfect modern life. Brittany hadn't wanted to get rid of me because I was failing. She'd wanted to get rid of me because I was succeeding, at being a grandmother, at being helpful, at being present in ways that made her feel threatened or judged. I thought about all the times I'd apologized for offering help, all the times I'd retreated to my room to avoid causing tension, all the times I'd accepted their explanations about what was best for me, instead of trusting my own instincts. I had been slowly erasing myself bit by bit, trying to become small enough, quiet enough, accommodating enough to earn the right to stay in their lives. But I didn't need to earn that right. I was their family. I was Sophie and Jake's grandmother, Marcus's mother, the woman who had helped raise these children and support this household. My worth wasn't dependent on their approval. David's letter had reminded me of something I'd forgotten in my grief and desperation to belong. I had choices. I had resources. I had strength. For the first time in months, I felt something I'd almost forgotten existed. Hope mixed with quiet determination. The fire was coming back, and this time, no one was going to extinguish it. I didn't call Marcus or Brittany. For the first time in months, I made decisions without considering their feelings, their schedules, or their opinions. It was surprisingly liberating. At 8:30 a.m. sharp on Friday morning, I called Peterson, Hayes, and Associates from the motel phone, my voice steady and professional in a way that reminded me of the teacher I used to be when handling difficult parent conferences. Mr. Peterson, this is Elena Martinez. I received your letter about my husband's trust fund, and I need to discuss my options. Mrs. Martinez. His voice was warm with recognition. David spoke about you often. He was very specific about wanting to protect your independence. Can you come in this afternoon? Within 3 hours, I was sitting in Mr. Peterson's mahogany-paneled office, wearing my best navy dress and the pearl earrings David had given me. I felt like myself again, competent, dignified, worthy of respect. Mr. Peterson treated me not like a confused elderly woman, but like an intelligent client making important financial decisions. "Your husband was quite prescient," he said, reviewing my case file. "Elder abandonment is unfortunately common, and the laws in our state are very clear about it. What your son and daughter-in-law did, removing you from the home without proper notice or cause, providing inadequate financial support, and leaving you in unsuitable housing, constitutes elder neglect under state law." I learned that I could access the trust fund immediately, that David had specifically structured it to bypass any need for family involvement or approval. By Tuesday morning, I had $180,000 in my own private checking account for the first time in my life. The number on my bank statement felt like freedom printed in black and white. But money was only the beginning of my plan. I spent Wednesday apartment hunting, but not in the depressing senior communities Marcus and Brittany had suggested. Instead, I found a bright one-bedroom apartment in Riverside Gardens, a quiet complex near the community center where I'd taught evening literacy classes years ago. The apartment had hardwood floors, a small balcony overlooking a garden, and, most importantly, it was mine. I signed the lease that afternoon, paid first month's rent and security deposit in cash, and scheduled movers for the following week. Not that I had much to move. Everything that mattered to me was still in the house on Maple Street, in the room that had briefly been mine. But I was starting fresh, and that felt intentional rather than sad. I enrolled in a computer literacy class at the community center, determined to understand the digital world my family had assumed was too complicated for me. The instructor, a patient woman named Carol who was close to my age, seemed surprised by how quickly I caught on. "You have a real aptitude for this, Elena," she said after my third class. "Have you considered tutoring? There's such a demand for computer skills among adults." Tutoring? I hadn't thought about returning to teaching in any form, but the idea sparked something in me that had been dormant too long. I also consulted with a second attorney, one who specialized in elder rights, just to understand all my options. I wasn't planning to take legal action against Marcus and Brittany, but I wanted them to know, when the time was right, that I understood exactly what they had done and what my rights were. I bought a cell phone and learned how to use it. I opened accounts at the grocery store and the pharmacy near my new apartment. I even purchased a small used car from a dealer who treated me like a serious customer rather than a confused old lady. For the first time in years, I was building a life that belonged entirely to me. The first call came on Thursday morning, exactly 1 week after they'd abandoned me at the Sunset Motel. I was in my new apartment, directing the furniture delivery team on where to place the small dining table I'd bought. My first major purchase with David's trust money. When my new cell phone rang, I saw Marcus's number on the screen and felt something I hadn't experienced in months. The luxury of choice. I could answer, or I could let it go to voicemail. I chose silence. "Mom," his voice said into my voicemail, "it's Marcus. I just wanted to check on you. We haven't heard from you since Saturday. Are you okay? Call me back when you get this." Since Saturday. As if dropping your mother at a roadside motel was just a minor scheduling conflict that deserved a casual follow-up call. The second call came that afternoon. "Mom, it's me again. I tried calling the motel, but they said you checked out? Where are you staying? I'm getting worried. Please call me back." I was unpacking my few belongings in my bright, clean apartment, hanging my favorite cardigan in a closet that belonged entirely to me, when the third call came that evening. This time, there was a different tone in Marcus's voice. Less casual concern, more genuine panic. "Mom, please call me. I don't know where you are, and I can't sleep not knowing if you're safe. I know you're upset, but we need to talk. There are some complications with the places we looked at. Just please call me back." Complications. I almost smiled as I arranged David's photo on my new nightstand. I had a feeling I knew what those complications might be. Friday brought 2 more calls, and by Saturday, Brittany was leaving messages too. "Elena, this is Brittany. Marcus is really worried about you. We just want to know you're okay. Also, we need to discuss some financial arrangements. Can you please call us back? Financial arrangements. There it was. I spent Saturday morning at the community center, learning how to use email and discovering that I could actually understand complicated technology better than my family had led me to believe. When I checked my phone afterward, there were 4 missed calls and 3 text messages. A communication method I was apparently supposed to be too old to master. The messages revealed everything I'd suspected. The assisted living facilities they'd applied to required financial guarantees that Marcus and Brittany couldn't provide, not without the steady contribution of my pension payments. Sunset Manor needed proof of $3,000 monthly income, plus a substantial security deposit. Golden Years Community required a family member to co-sign financial responsibility for any unpaid fees. Without my pension covering nearly half their mortgage, they were discovering that their comfortable lifestyle had been built on my financial contribution, money they'd treated as their natural right rather than my generous choice. But there were other problems too. Jake's soccer registration was past due because I'd always handled those payments. Sophie's piano teacher had called asking about missed lessons I'd been paying for. The cleaning service had canceled because no one had been home to let them in during the day, a job I'd been quietly managing. They were learning, day by day, exactly how much work I'd been doing that they'd dismissed as simple helping around the house. On Sunday night, Marcus's voice cracked in his voicemail. "Mom, I'm scared something happened to you. I've called hospitals. I've called Rosa in Arizona. I even called your old school. No one has heard from you. Please, just let me know you're alive. We can figure everything else out." I listened to his message while sitting on my small balcony, watching the sunset paint the garden below in shades of gold and pink. For the first time in months, I felt completely peaceful. I had power now. And it wasn't the cruel power of revenge. It was the quiet power of choice. Marcus found me on Tuesday morning. I was sitting at my small dining table, grading practice worksheets for the adult literacy students I'd started tutoring at the community center when I heard a knock at my apartment door. Through the peephole, I saw my son standing in the hallway, looking haggard and desperate in a way that might have broken my heart just 2 weeks ago. Now, it simply confirmed what I already knew. He needed me far more than I needed him. I opened the door slowly, taking in his appearance. His hair was uncombed, his shirt wrinkled, and there were dark circles under his eyes that suggested he hadn't been sleeping well. "Hello, Marcus." "Mom." His voice cracked like he was 12 years old again. "Thank God. I've been looking everywhere for you. Where did you get the money for this place?" I stepped back to let him in, watching his face as he took in my apartment. The morning light streaming through clean windows, the small but comfortable furniture I'd chosen myself, the photos I'd arranged on my bookshelf, including several of him and the grandchildren, because I wasn't cruel enough to erase my family even after they'd tried to erase me. "It's lovely, isn't it?" I said calmly, returning to my seat at the dining table. "Would you like some coffee? I just made a fresh pot." "Mom, how did you afford this?" He was still standing, looking around like he was seeing a magic trick he couldn't understand. "The motel bill, this apartment, furniture. Your pension doesn't cover all this." I reached into the folder beside me and pulled out the letter from David's attorney, placing it on the table between us. "Your father left me a trust fund, Marcus. $180,000 that I never knew existed. Mr. Peterson sent me this letter 6 months ago, but somehow it ended up in my suitcase when you and Brittany dropped me at that motel." Marcus's face went white as he read the letterhead. "Peterson, Hayes and Associates? Dad's lawyer? Mom, I don't understand." "Your father was a wise man," I said, pouring myself a cup of coffee with steady hands. "He anticipated that I might someday find myself in exactly the situation you and Brittany put me in. Abandoned by family members who saw me as a burden rather than a person." "We didn't abandon you," Marcus said quickly, finally sitting down across from me. "We were trying to help. The assisted living places we looked at had activities, people your own age." "Marcus." My voice was gentle but firm, the same tone I'd used when he was a child making excuses for broken promises. What you and Brittany did has a legal name. It's called elder abandonment, and it's against the law in this state. Removing an elderly person from their home without proper notice, providing inadequate financial support, and leaving them in unsuitable housing conditions. He stared at me as if I'd started speaking a foreign language. Legal name? Mom, you're talking like someone who consulted with an attorney? I smiled slightly. Because I did. I've also learned about elder abuse laws, property rights, and financial exploitation. Did you know that when an elderly person contributes significantly to a household and is then removed without cause, they have legal recourse? Did you know that emotional abuse of the elderly carries the same legal weight as physical abuse? Mom, we would never. You told me I was too old to live with my own family, Marcus. You drove me to a motel and gave me $200 like I was a vagrant you were trying to get rid of. You made decisions about my future without including me in the conversation. I kept my voice calm, but each word was precise, deliberate. That's exactly what elder abuse looks like. Marcus put his head in his hands. I thought we were doing what was best for everyone. Brittany said a lot of things. What did you say, son? When did you become someone who makes decisions about his mother's life without asking his mother's opinion? For the first time since he'd arrived, Marcus looked directly at me, really looked at me. You seem so different. I seem like myself, I replied. Perhaps that's what's different. The real revelation came 3 days later, and it wasn't something I went looking for. Sometimes justice finds you when you're simply living your life with dignity and purpose. I was at the community center, helping my adult student Maria with her computer skills, when my phone buzzed with a call from Mr. Peterson. Mrs. Martinez, I have some information you need to know about. Can you come in this afternoon? It's regarding your former living situation. An hour later, I was back in his mahogany-paneled office, but this time he looked grim rather than encouraging. Elena, I've been contacted by a contractor named Jim Sullivan. He's asking questions about the legal status of the house on Maple Street, specifically about renovations that were supposed to begin this week. Renovations? I set down my coffee cup carefully. What kind of renovations? Mr. Peterson opened a file folder and spread several documents across his desk. According to Mr. Sullivan, your daughter-in-law hired him 6 weeks ago to convert the back bedroom, your room, into a home office suite. The project includes knocking out a wall to expand into the adjacent bathroom, installing built-in shelving, new flooring, professional lighting, and a separate entrance. The total cost is $18,000. 6 weeks ago. I was still living in that room 6 weeks ago, still making my pension payments, still believing I was a valued member of the family. But here's the interesting part, Mr. Peterson continued. Mrs. Martinez paid Sullivan a $9,000 down payment using funds from your son's checking account, the same account your pension payments were deposited into. She told Sullivan the room was being vacated because the previous occupant was moving to a care facility. The blood drained from my face. Brittany hadn't made a sudden decision to get rid of me. She'd been planning it for months, already spending my own money to erase me from the house before she'd even told me I was leaving. There's more, Mr. Peterson said gently. Sullivan arrived at the house this morning to begin the demolition, but your son apparently had no idea about the extent of the renovations. When Sullivan started removing the bathroom fixtures, your son became upset and told him there had been a misunderstanding. Sullivan called me because he'd done a background check on the property, standard procedure for major renovations, and discovered that you still have legal rights to the house under the original deed transfer. I stared at the contractor's paperwork, seeing Brittany's signature authorizing work to begin immediately after the current occupant relocates. She'd signed these papers while I was still helping Sophie with homework, while I was still cooking Sunday dinners, while I was still believing her hugs and her words about me being a blessing to the family. What happened when Sullivan tried to start the work? I asked. Your son called him off, but Sullivan demanded his down payment back since the work was canceled. When your son couldn't provide it immediately, Sullivan filed a contractor's lien against the property. That's when I got involved, because any legal action involving that house triggers the elder protection clauses your husband put in place. Mr. Peterson leaned forward. Elena, I need you to know that what your daughter-in-law did constitutes financial elder abuse under state law. She used your pension money to fund renovations that would eliminate your living space, all while pretending to care about your welfare. This goes far beyond neglect. This is premeditated exploitation. What does that mean legally? It means I've filed a formal complaint with Adult Protective Services, and there's now a temporary legal freeze on the property pending a full investigation. No one can make major financial decisions about that house, including selling it or taking out loans against it, until this is resolved. I sat back in the leather chair, processing this information. Brittany hadn't just wanted me gone. She'd been actively planning my removal while taking my money to fund my own erasure. She'd calculated exactly how to get rid of me while profiting from my absence. Mr. Peterson, I said finally, I want to understand all of my options. For the first time since this ordeal began, I wasn't the victim of someone else's plan. I was the architect of my own justice. 2 months after the legal freeze was placed on the house, Marcus appeared at my apartment door again. But this time he looked different, not frantic or desperate, but broken in a deeper way. When I opened the door, I could see he'd been crying. Mom, he said quietly, can we talk? Please? I led him to my small living room, where afternoon sunlight streamed through windows I'd decorated with plants and cheerful curtains. I'd been reading when he arrived. A mystery novel I'd chosen simply because I wanted to, not because it was appropriate for my age or met someone else's approval. I'm divorcing Brittany, he said without preamble, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. I should have done it 2 years ago, but I was too much of a coward to see what was really happening. I set my book aside and waited. This was his conversation to have. I found out about the contractor, about the money, about all of it. His voice was thick with shame. She'd been planning to get rid of you for months, Mom. She had the whole office renovation designed and contracted before she ever suggested assisted living. She was using your pension money to fund removing you from our lives. I know, I said simply. Mr. Peterson told me. But there's more. Marcus looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. I found her real estate listings on her computer. She was already marketing our house as a contemporary family home with home office suite, describing your room as a converted professional workspace with separate entrance. She was planning to sell the house and move us to a bigger place, and the increased value from your room renovation was going to fund it. I felt a flicker of something, not surprise, but a kind of sad confirmation of what I'd suspected about Brittany's true motivations. She told me you were becoming confused, that you were getting upset about small things, that living with us was making you anxious and depressed. Marcus's voice cracked. She said you'd be happier with people your own age, that we were holding you back from making friends and having adventures. She made it sound like we were doing you a favor. And you believed her. I wanted to believe her, he admitted. It was easier than admitting that my wife was manipulating me into abandoning my own mother. It was easier than standing up to her when she complained about every little thing you did. It was easier than being the kind of man my father would have been proud of. We sat in silence for several minutes. Outside, I could hear children playing in the garden courtyard, their laughter bright and uncomplicated. I'm sorry, Mom. Marcus's voice was barely a whisper. I'm sorry I let her convince me that loving you was the same as enabling you. I'm sorry I didn't protect you from her. I'm sorry I was too weak to be the son you deserved. I looked at this man, my son, who I'd raised alone for years while David was deployed, who I'd taught to ride a bike and helped with algebra homework, and cheered for at every baseball game, and I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness exactly, because forgiveness implied I'd been holding on to anger. What I felt was more like peace. Marcus, I said gently, I don't need you to rescue me now. I don't need you to fix what happened or make it up to me. What I need is for you to be honest with yourself about how this happened so it never happens again. I want to make this right, he said desperately. I want you to come back. The kids miss you so much, and I'm not coming back to live with you, I said calmly. Not because I don't love you, but because I've discovered I love myself too much to put myself in that position again. For the first time in our conversation, Marcus really looked at me, at my apartment, at the life I'd built, at the woman I'd become in my independence. You seem so strong, he said, wonder in his voice. I am strong, I replied. I always was. I just forgot for a while. 6 months later, I'm sitting in my favorite spot, the small balcony of my apartment overlooking the community garden, grading papers for my newest venture. After discovering how much I enjoyed tutoring adults at the community center, I started my own small business, Second Chapter Learning, helping adults over 50 navigate computer skills, online banking, and digital communication. The irony isn't lost on me that I'm teaching other people the very skills my family once assumed I was too old to master. It's Saturday afternoon, and I'm expecting visitors. Not the desperate, guilty visits Marcus used to make, but the joyful kind I'd almost forgotten existed. Sophie and Jake are coming for our weekly Grandma Day, a tradition we started after Marcus and I found our new normal. The doorbell rings at exactly 2 p.m., and I hear familiar giggles in the hallway. When I open the door, Sophie throws her arms around me with the uninhibited affection of a 13-year-old who finally gets to love her grandmother without walking through a minefield of adult tensions. Grandma Elena, I brought my algebra homework. Mom says you explain it better than anyone. Mom. Marcus remarried 8 months ago to a woman named Catherine, a nurse who treats me like a respected family matriarch rather than an inconvenience to be managed. Their relationship is built on honesty rather than manipulation, and I can see in Marcus's eyes that he's finally learned the difference. Jake bounces through the door carrying his latest art project. Look, Grandma, I painted the garden from your balcony. Mrs. Catherine says I got the colors just right. We settle around my small dining table, the same table where Marcus once sat listening to me explain elder abandonment laws, where I've since hosted dinner parties for my new friends from the community center, where I've built a life that belongs entirely to me. As the children work on homework and art, chattering about school and friends and weekend plans, I think about the woman who sat in that motel room 8 months ago, believing she had become invisible and disposable. That woman couldn't have imagined this afternoon, couldn't have pictured herself confident and independent, running a small business, maintaining her own apartment, making her own choices about how to spend her time and money. Grandma, Sophie says, looking up from her math problems, I'm glad you live here instead of with us. The comment might have hurt 8 months ago, but now I understand what she means. Why is that, sweetheart? Because when I come to see you, it's special. You're not tired or stressed about house stuff. You're just Grandma, and this is your place where we get to have adventures together. From the mouths of children comes the truth adults often miss. Love isn't about living in the same space or being constantly available. Love is about being fully present when you choose to be together. As the sun sets over the garden, I watch my grandchildren pack up their things, both of them chattering about next Saturday's plans. Marcus arrives to pick them up, and he lingers for a moment in my doorway. You look happy, Mom, he says simply. I am happy, I reply, and I mean it completely. After they leave, I sit back on my balcony with a cup of tea, surrounded by the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived. I'm not the same woman who believed her worth was measured by how useful she could make herself to others. I'm not the woman who apologized for taking up space or asked permission to have opinions. I am Elena Martinez, 63 years old, and I am exactly where I belong. Sometimes the greatest gift life gives you is showing you that you're strong enough to start over, wise enough to recognize your own value, and brave enough to choose yourself. I discovered I wasn't ending my story in that motel room. I was beginning the best chapter yet.